Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into your stack of articles and notes today, all about scaling agile.
Specifically, Disciplined Agile, or DA.
Right.
You're clearly interested in keeping teams nimble as projects grow.
Yeah.
And let me tell you,
That's a challenge a lot of people are grappling with.
it really is.
Yeah.
It really is.
I think so many teams, they find a groove that works when they're small. But then as soon as you start to scale up,
Things get complicated.
absolutely. It's like trying to bake a giant pizza.
Right? You can't just use a bigger oven.
Right.
You need a different approach altogether.
I like that analogy.
And that's where DA comes in.
Yeah.
Right? It helps you identify what those pressure points are,
Yeah.
whether it's team size, location, even those pesky regulations.
And then it provides tailored strategies.
So no one-size-fits-all solutions here.
And exactly.
It recognizes that every scaling challenge is unique.
Okay.
So, a team of 10 becoming 50. That faces different hurdles than, say, managing multiple teams across time zones.
Right.
Which is totally different from navigating strict industry regulations.
And speaking of challenges, you specifically highlighted compliance requirements in your research.
How does DA approach those?
So that's where the program lifecycle comes in.
All right.
Think of it as a blueprint.
Not just for a single team, but for coordinating multiple teams towards a shared goal.
So more than just making sure everyone has the same deadlines.
Way more, way more.
We're talking about aligning on multiple levels.
Okay.
Architecture, team structure, even the processes they use.
Imagine like one team is using a NoSQL database, while another team's relying on a relational one.
Okay.
DA would push for those discussions to happen early on.
To make sure those choices integrate smoothly later on.
So you're saying that just like a conductor aligns an orchestra.
DA helps us figure out who needs to lead which aspects of a scaled project. Without being overly rigid, of course.
Precisely.
DA actually calls this architectural guardrails, which essentially means having some overarching guidance to make sure that everything integrates smoothly in the end.
Otherwise, you risk ending up with a system that's held together by duct tape and prayers.
We've all been there. Right.
Exactly.
Staring at a code base and wondering who thought this was a good idea.
Exactly.
But are we saying there needs to be one person calling all the shots here?
Not at all. Not at all.
DA isn't about rigid hierarchies.
Okay.
It's about adapting the structure to fit the work.
Okay.
You need people who can bridge the gaps between those teams.
Someone to oversee the technical vision.
Mm-hmm.
Someone to make sure things align with business objectives.
Okay.
And someone to facilitate communication.
Prevent those dreaded silos from forming.
Those rules seem critical.
Especially as things grow more complex.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me more about how DA helps prevent communication breakdowns?
It's all about building feedback loops and collaboration points.
Right into the process.
Okay.
So, for example, DA might encourage using visual management tools.
Where everyone can see the project's progress,
Okay.
identify dependencies, and flag potential roadblocks early on.
So less talking 8T each other.
And more creating a shared understanding through visuals, dashboards, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
A picture often is worth 1,000 words, especially when you're trying to get multiple teams on the same page.
That makes a lot of sense.
So it's almost like creating a shared language that everyone understands, even if they come from different backgrounds.
That's fascinating.
This idea of visual management is really resonating with me.
Yeah.
It's a game changer, especially when you're dealing with complex projects and distributed teams. Instead of relying on these endless email chains or, confusing spreadsheets,
Right.
everyone has a clear visual representation of what's happening, where the dependencies are, what's coming next.
It's like that saying, a picture is worth 1,000 meetings.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and speaking of different perspectives,
one of the things I really appreciate about DA is its focus on embracing the human element,
Okay.
It recognizes that people aren't robots.
Right.
And that diversity of thought is actually a strength.
So instead of trying to, force everyone into a rigid process,
Yeah.
DA encourages us to, harness those different perspectives.
Exactly.
And use them to our advantage.
Precisely.
When you have people with different experiences, different working styles, different cultural backgrounds even,
Right.
you're so much more likely to uncover those aha moments.
Those innovative solutions that you might miss if everyone thinks alike.
It's like that classic story of the group of engineers.
Trying to solve a problem.
Exactly.
And then the janitor walks by, overhears the conversation,
Right.
and offers a simple solution that they never even considered
Yeah.
because they were so stuck in their own heads.
Exactly.
And DA provides the framework for those kinds of moments to happen
Okay.
more organically.
Even in a large-scale setting where it's so easy to get bogged down in process,
That reminds me of something else I highlighted in my notes.
the idea of people first when it comes to scaling agile.
Yes.
It's not enough to just throw more bodies at a problem.
Right?
You need to make sure the team is set up for success.
Absolutely, DA emphasizes.
The importance of things like team building, communication, conflict resolution, not just as nice-to-haves, but as essential ingredients for high-performing teams, especially at scale.
It makes you realize that scaling Agile isn't just about scaling the technical side of things.
Right.
It's about scaling the human side as well.
You've hit the nail on the head.
It's about creating an environment where everyone feels valued, where they can communicate openly, and where they have the support they need to do their best work.
And that kind of environment doesn't just happen by accident, does it?
Definitely not. Definitely not.
It takes conscious effort, it takes clear communication, and a willingness to adapt and evolve as the team grows.
So it's about building a culture of continuous improvement,
Yeah.
not just for the product or service you're building.
But for the team itself.
Now you're getting it.
And that leads us to one of the most important aspects of DA, which often gets overlooked.
What gets overlooked? You've got me intrigued.
It's the focus on governance.
Now, before you tune out thinking about boring bureaucracy.
This isn't about stifling innovation with red tape.
Okay.
It's about finding the right balance.
Between agility and control.
Oh, okay. I can see where that might be tricky.
As teams grow, how do you maintain flexibility without things descending into chaos?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And DA provides some really useful guidance here.
Okay.
It encourages teams to think about governance.
In a more lightweight, adaptable way.
Can you give me an example?
What does that look like in practice?
Sure.
Imagine you're working on like a large-scale software project
Okay.
with multiple teams contributing code.
In a traditional, heavily governed environment.
You might have a separate quality assurance team
Okay.
that does all the testing at the end of each sprint.
Oh, no.
The dreaded waterfall creeping back in.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what DA tries to avoid.
Okay.
Instead, it might suggest embedding testing expertise within each development team.
Empowering them to take ownership of quality from the get-go.
So more shared responsibility.
Rather than siloed oversight.
Precisely.
That way you're building quality into the process from the start, rather than trying to bolt it on at the end, which, let's be honest.
Rarely ends well.
That's a great point.
But what about those situations where some level of oversight is unavoidable?
Like in your earlier example of highly regulated industries.
Great question.
DA doesn't advocate for throwing out governance entirely.
Right.
It's about being pragmatic.
Yeah. If you're in finance, for example,
Right.
you can't just ignore regulatory requirements.
Look, what you can do is find ways to integrate them into your agile process.
In a way that's as lightweight and flexible as possible.
So it's about working smarter, not harder.
Exactly.
Finding ways to align those compliance needs with your agile principles,
Yes.
rather than seeing them as being at odds.
You got it.
It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Where you're meeting those external requirements without stifling the team's creativity and ability to adapt.
This has been incredibly insightful.
As we wrap up, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
If you only remember one thing from this deep dive,
Let it be this.
scaling agile with DA is a journey, not a destination. There's no magic formula, no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
It's about continuous learning, adapting, and evolving as your team and projects grow.
That's such an important reminder.
So to our listener out there, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the challenges of scaling agile,
Remember, you're not alone.
take it one step at a time, experiment, learn from your mistakes, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
And who knows, you might even discover some innovative solutions.
That work even better than you imagined.
Until next time, happy scaling.